Welcome to Casual Watch Talk, the podcast from the Casual Watch Reviewer YouTube channel. Join us as we talk everything watches, from watch collecting, the latest horology news and interviews. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe on your favourite podcast app. Let's dive into the show. Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 46 of Casual Watch Talk. So today, unfortunately, Chris isn't able to join me again, but I'm joined by a very special guest, Mike France from Christopher Ward. So thanks so much for joining us, Mike.
Good to be with you guys.
I think it's fair to say Christopher Ward's had a pretty standout couple of years. I recently covered this on my review of the Christopher Ward C65 World Timer. But for anyone that's not familiar with the brand, would you mind giving us a quick, brief history of Christopher Ward?
Sure. We started Chris Ward up in 2004. The three of us then, the eponymous Christopher Ward, we gave the name of the business because it sounded the most English, and we wanted a real person's name. And being a British company, Mike France isn't the best name probably to have on the dial of a British watch brand, but Peter Ellis, who's still working with me in the business, he and I had just sold an educational toy business in the UK called Early Learning Centre in the April. And by the middle of May, I particularly was pretty bored, looking for the next sort of thing to get involved with. Had a particular love of or interest in watches, knew nothing about watches, by the way, other than I liked watches, and convinced the other two that setting up a watch brand and then what turned out to be the first online only watch brand was a good idea. So we set off to conquer the world of watches, knowing nothing about it at all, but learned pretty quickly, got very lucky along the way. We had people we'd known for a number of years who were able to introduce us in the very early days to some incredible people involved in the watch industry. And so we were given a sort of a very early and unusual insight to what really goes on in the watch industry, as opposed to what some people think goes on in the watch industry, or what some people would like you to think goes on in the watch industry, including a real light bulb moment when we discovered the sort of markups that most brands, all brands were applying to their watches. A bit like yourself, I'm from a sort of a working class northern background in England, and my mother sits on my shoulder all the while, wanting to know the value of things as opposed to the price of things. And throughout my career, I've always lived by the maxim that you try and pass on as much value to the consumer as you possibly can, and be fair in everything, in all your dealings with them. And we felt at the time that this was far from the case in the watch industry. So we decided that the opportunity for us was not just to create a different business model. It sounds ridiculous at the moment today, doesn't it? That people were ringing me up saying, "You'll never sell watches online. Just don't even go there, Mike." It sounds ridiculous now, doesn't it, to even conceive of that? But that was what people genuinely thought back in 2004. I mean, they were convinced that you couldn't sell clothing online at the time. But as we'd come out of Early Learning Centre, having sold climbing frames online, we thought it was probably an easier gig to sell watches. Frankly, we embarked on a philosophy of not just a business model that was unique at the time, but a philosophy about being completely transparent about everything we do, which I hope we've lived up to. And that included the pricing model. And we wanted it to be fair and transparent. And so we apply a very simple, and have done from day one and continue to do so today. And as long as I've got anything to do with the business, it will remain the case. We simply multiply the manufacturing cost price by 3, which just covers all of our overheads, covers our marketing costs, and gives us a fair margin, but not an excessive margin. And therefore, that's the model that's been in existence since day one. And we got very lucky because in the early days, when frankly, when you start up a new company, you don't know what's going to happen. This was a sector that we knew very little about. We launched our website. We'd taken some advertising out. Sales were trickling in the first autumn up to Christmas. And then suddenly there was a huge spike in sales. And we had no idea why, apart from me being a marketing genius. We had absolutely no idea why it was happening. But ultimately, we discovered that a chap in Tasmania, off the coast of Australia, had come across one of our ads for our very first watch, the C5 Malvern Automatic. He couldn't believe that we could possibly be selling an automatic Swiss movement watch with an ETA 28242 in it at the price we were offering it at, and therefore bought one from us without us knowing why, to expose us, because he was a major poster on one of the largest forums at the time, still is a big forum, timezone.com. He bought the watch, and to his eternal credit and to our eternal good fortune, when he received the watch and opened the case back up, and he knew about watches, he realized that this was actually a genuine ETA 28242, and then posted a eulogizing review on timezone.com, which pronounced, amongst other things, that he had discovered the best value watch, mechanical watch available in the world. Wow. And for a while on timezone.com, we were being talked about more than Rolex were. This is a brand that's been going three months, and of course, people were, as happens occasionally on blogs and forums, there were trolls, there were people, having to go at him for even suggesting this was possible. But ultimately, it sparked into life the brand. Better than any how the subterranean world of watch aficionados works. I mean, we're all sort of constantly reading blogs, forums, finding out about the things that we love. And of course, that spread, and it was a great start for us. Pure happenstance, really. And I do think, most stories of of success in life have more than a slice of luck attached to it. And I think we are no exception in that regard.
It was quite revolutionary at the time, selling watches like that. I mean, even some of the big brands now don't get the online presence right whatsoever. Not only was it revolutionary, you're selling watches online, but also you gave that security to people of buying online with the extended money back guarantee, or return policy, I should say, and then the warranty as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, we looked at the offers that were available at the time. We were fortunate enough to be meeting and introduced to senior people in the watch industry, and therefore, we had access to ETA movements at the time, then Solita movements, and we realised that the average 12-month or 2-year warranty on a movement was completely erroneous to what we'd been used to, and wondered why, if these were such fantastic movements, why couldn't brands offer the consumer a longer warranty? So we, from launch, decided that one of the ways we could break down any resistance to people even ordering a watch online without seeing it, and clearly in those days there was going to be more resistance than there is today, as people were more unsure about the internet. There's still some resistance today in some quarters, but I think it's being broken down all the time. And I think what's happened fortunately, for a sad reason, as we all know, the coronavirus epidemic has probably accelerated greatly the move towards online in all sorts of sectors, and including the watch industry. To break down resistance to people thinking they were taking an inordinate risk, we offered a 60-day free return. So effectively, and it still remains the case, effectively it's a try before you buy. Yeah. We've got nothing to hide. And what we found from day one, I'm very pleased to say, is we have an incredibly small returns rate, because I think one of the, again, fortunately for us, we've always tried to focus on the quality of what we do. I think when I look back to what we were selling in 2005 versus what we're selling now, there is little comparison. But at the time, it was the best quality we could provide, and so the prices were unheard of in our sector. So we had very few returns, and then we backed that with the longest warranty, movement warranty in existence at the time, and still today. I'm not aware of anybody who's beaten it. So our 60/60 guarantee, as we call it, has been a fundamental pillar of customer support for us from day one, and I think it does resonate. It's had many imitators or part imitators since those early days, but as I say, today I still think it's the exception rather than the rule, and arguably the best guarantee available in the watch sector.
You just touched on it then about the coronavirus epidemic, and we've been covering it on our podcast right from earlier in the year, where it didn't seem like it was going to take a hold, certainly in the rest of the world. It was China focused, but as it sort of went on, I think it really showed two sectors, and I think I remember this happening in 2008 when there was the economic downturn, is the companies that did well either offered a luxury goods or quality, and the middle of the road brands really suffered. And I think we really saw that playing out with some of the main brands. I recently saw an interview you did with Watch Pro where you're saying that actually it's been a very successful year for you because of the foundations that you built with the sales model early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, we've had a good year, and I'm pretty sure have gained quite significant market share. To be honest, I'm sad for some of the brands who are largely offline and therefore have suffered. So I don't take great delight in some of the problems they've had. But being a purely online business, we've clearly benefited. I think we made our own luck as well to some extent, because the conventional wisdom says that in such times, the first budget to get hacked away at is the marketing budget.
Yeah.
So we doubled it and went the other way. So I'm a big believer in zagging when others zig. Again, it was an informed decision based on things we'd done in the past. But in May, when we launched our first ever TV campaign built around a new line that we'd introduced called the C60 Sapphire. I've no way of proving this, by the way, but if I say it often enough, people might believe it to be true. But I actually think that in May, Christopher Ward had the best-selling watch by volume under £1,000, or between £500 and £1,500 in the world, judging by the sales we had. But we were alone. I mean, everybody else had pulled all their advertising. I mean, for many people who were like us, who were advertising either on billboards or in magazine titles, they'd vanished. They weren't on the newsstands anymore.
Yeah.
So people had pulled all their advertising, and we decided to become the first British watch brand, we think maybe even ever, to advertise on TV. There was no model that said it was going to work. We've got some really talented people both inside the business and partners who work with us on these sorts of things. And the team that we put together to very quickly work out what to do and when to do it, I think did an unbelievable job, not just in securing the space for us on the TV screens, but producing an ad, a really high quality ad. In fact, the only ad during the first couple of months of, other than Her Majesty's government, we were the only brand in the UK creating a new ad at that time, and I'm rather proud of that. I mean, when you think of some of the big boys, I mean, we're this little tiddler swimming around, sort of, yes, of course we can of course we can produce a TV ad in lockdown where with social distancing. It was a nightmare, and they were magnificent. And we produced the C60 Sapphire, which I add, and I think we're still running it, and that generated for us a really fantastic May. And as I say, the world was, we were a beacon because no one else was doing much. And I think we benefited by going on the front foot at a time when everybody else was sort of, hunkered down, as it were. I think we were, again, fortunate to be launching a watch at that time that just hits all the buttons. we've just recently released a sort of another sapphire-based watch called the C60 Blue, which is all the profits are going to the Blue Marine Foundation, which is a marine and ocean charity that we support. They're effectively trying to reduce the overfishing in our oceans, and it's a pretty important deal because it's only relatively recently people have understood the importance of the oceans in reducing global warming, and they're right at a tipping point now. I'll get on the soap. This is nothing to do with watches. This is a completely separate soapbox, but it is important because the oceans have been absorbing our carbon dioxide heat, and they're right at the tipping point where they cannot absorb much more. If they can't absorb any more of the excess heat that we're producing in the world, the excess carbon dioxide in the world, then we really are in trouble. A really important charity for us. But anyway, that's so back to the C60 Sapphire. But by the way, the C60 Blue, which is the watch charity, has been phenomenal already. I'm so pleased, and BMF or Blue as they prefer to be called, are delighted with the response as well, because it's been fantastic, and we only launched it last week. But yeah, the C60, the original C60 Sapphire, became our fastest selling launch ever, in part because I think it's an really intriguing watch, but also part because we promoted it so strongly on the TV, and that's helped to fuel a really good year, as has the next major launch we had, which is the C60 Super Compressor, which I know you've seen, and I know you've spoken of.
I'm really excited to get a review copy to show, although a couple of our followers on the Facebook group have this watch as well. Now, you said when you invented the watch that it was the first true super compressor, but I'd like to delve into that a little bit more. Obviously, there is compressor watches, you've got Vostok, and then a lot of modern reinterpretations are in compressor style cases. When you say this is the first super compressor for, I believe, 50 years, what does that mean to a watch collector, I guess, or what's your interpretation of that?
Well, it's not an interpretation. It's actually a statement of fact.
Yeah.
Back in 1954, a company called Irving Piqueret, EPSA for short, introduced a super compressor or compressor watches. The super compressor was the third evocation and by far the best, which allowed, as I think you know, it allowed the case back compressed the deeper the diver went, which prevented what had been happening at great depths or reasonable depths previously, which was the explosion of the watch.
Yeah.
Not very useful for professional divers particularly. And Piqueret patented a really ingenious, and it really is ingenious, and like all great inventions, a simple but very, very clever piece of engineering, which had a coil spring inside the case back, which effectively pushes back against the back plate, to push it back against the gasket, to make the gasket seal much more secure than it would otherwise be, and therefore not allowing any water seepage into it. This mechanism hasn't been reproduced, genuinely, not by Vostok, not by anybody, hasn't been reproduced since 1972, I think, is the very last one that went out. And although many brands have introduced watches called compressors, like many things in the watch industry, it's bullshit baffles brains. People buy it because it's said with such conviction. People think, that must be, well, I mean, some people probably don't even question what the word compressor actually means.
Yes.
But the clue is in the name. If it doesn't compress, it isn't a compressor. And none of them compress, and none of them. This was brought to my attention by an owner of ours, an Austrian owner of ours, who wrote an email to me saying, love the C60 Trident he just bought. Love the C65 case that we just introduced. Had I ever thought about doing a proper super compressor, because nobody's ever done one for 50 years, and really, and so we that was it. Just intrigued me. So Adrian Bushman, our senior designer, and I just then went and did our research on the matter, discovered this amazing treasure trove of EPSA watches. I mean, over 100 brands were using this patented mechanism back in the day. I mean, really great brands as well. But it had all vanished. And yet, because we're all going through a bit of a retro period in terms of, what we're all interested in. It's an interesting sort of, you've got Apple Watch at one end, and you've got retro going on in mechanical watches at the other end. Quite fascinating, isn't it? But therefore, people have gone dug back into what's been going on, dug back into if they've been going since then or before then, back into their own archives, pulled out things that they used to sell, some of which were called super compressors, and decided to, redo the aesthetic, which sometimes, but not always, included two crowns. And that's not, everybody thinks that's the sign of a super compressor.
Yes, yeah.
No, it's not. It's fairness. Most of the super compressors did tend to have the internal bezel, and therefore had the second crown at 2 o'clock to make that work. However, many didn't as well. So it's not the signal of a super compressor. The signal of a super compressor is actually that it compresses, and therefore we just thought, well, bloody hell, let's go and do a proper one.
Yeah.
And that's where our problem started, in a sense, because it turned out to be a more difficult exercise than I think certainly Adrian and I and Frank Stelzer, our technical director, ever thought it would be. But it became at one stage, I have to be honest, our technical guys in Beale, we have our ateliers in Beale, they came back to me and said, and Adrian said, no, this is not going to be possible to do. And it got shelved for about 3 months as we scurried around thinking, how can we break through this? And so we ended up paying over the odds at auction for a super compressor. And with our technical team in Beale, and with our amazing case manufacturer in China, they reverse engineered the whole thing. And I'll never forget, it was only a bit later than this time last year, December the 4th, I think it was, something like that, when we got about the 4th iteration that was due to be tested, because we had to obviously test it to make sure that it was watertight under pressure. And it was one of those great eureka moments, there was fist pumping going on. It was almost as if Everton had just won the Premier League. Fat chance of that happening. So it was one of those great moments, because it actually worked, and therefore all of the heartache and effort that all these guys had put into it, we knew was going to work out. And then it went through a whole process of, testing and and we eventually launched it in September, beginning of September. And I'm pleased to say it's being critically, incredibly well received by people like yourself and many, many other people who know a lot about watches. And fortunately for us, it's been a commercial success as well. But of all of the watches we have done since, and of all the things we've done since, I think probably bringing out Calibre H21 in 2014, this is the thing I'm most proud of, because I know how hard the team worked to bring it to fruition. And it's a kind of for us, people, I don't know what sort of a brand we are really. People call us a disruptor brand. We've never called ourselves that. We just do things we enjoy doing and hope to do them well, and hope people like them. But one of the things that I can say about our brand, it matters to all of those who work in Christopher Ward, is that we don't cut corners, and we genuinely, if we're going to call something a compressor, it better compress, because we ain't going to do it otherwise. And so in a way, it's sort of right at the heart of what we're about, in an industry that frankly, is still, as I say, full of the bullshit.
Yeah.
But there you go. That's that's the story of the super compressor.
Yeah, the reason that I mentioned about it being certainly the most exciting dive watch, I believe, that was released this year, and I think I said it, including the Rolexes, which will probably get me in trouble, but nobody's picked me up on it yet.
Couldn't agree more with you. Couldn't agree more.
Like you mentioned, a lot of watch companies are revisiting their back catalogue. Breitling's doing it at the moment, and some of the movements, like Omega's gone back to its 321 movement, but I don't remember anybody else taking the care to actually revisit a case of a vintage watch. You've got the components that they're revisiting, but not the case in the way that you did. Unlike the main brands, not only is it not a limited edition, you've also kept it within the price range of all the other watches. There's no additional that's been added on for the extra engineering that's... So how important is that to the brand, is the pricing? Because everything's within the same price bracket, isn't it?
It opens at 895. It's UK pounds, versus say the Sapphire at 795. It cost us, it's slightly more expensive, the case, because of what's involved in creating it. But as I said earlier, Sam, it's a very simple philosophy we have. Whatever it costs us to produce it, we multiply it by 3. I know people sort of think, well, no doubt, possibly we could have added a premium to it, but that it's just not what we do. And again, I'm not that complicated individual, frankly. I like, we like to keep things simple and straightforward and transparent. Therefore, we've got watches. I was just earlier today re-looking at a watch we brought out in the autumn of 2019, which was the C60 Apex, which I don't know if you're familiar with the watch, but it contains our SH21, our own movement with a power reserve. And it's what we had done is it's got an amazing sort of semi-skeletonized dial and some incredible bridge work in terms of the movement as well, particularly around the barrels. And that's our most expensive watch to date, at just shy of £3,500, 3,495 UK pounds. We only produced 100. I wish we had a limited edition of more than that, because we could have sold a lot more. But the same principle applies to that as applies to our leading watch, which is 395. It's 3 times the cost. It's just that you've got a really expensive movement in there. You've got some incredible bridge work. So it's not about compromising in any shape or form, and it's certainly not about gilding the lily in pricing.
Yes.
Whatever you see from Christopher Ward, you can be absolutely certain that it is a 3 times multiple, and therefore, you can work out what the cost of that is. And because I'm in the industry, I know, which other manufacturers, use the same movements, use the same case manufacturer, use the same dial manufacturers we do. I know broadly what they're paying, and I know what everybody else's markups are. And I know that I'm bound to say this, but because quality is at the heart of what we do, and it's kind of interesting you talk about cases, because we're really focused on things like cases, because we don't think the industry is particularly focused on things like cases.
I agree.
And we were, as well ourselves until 5 or 6 years ago, producing, well-engineered cases, pretty slab-sided. Why? They're rare, they're cheaper to produce. Yeah. The moment you start doing things like having facets that have got different types of polishing and brushing on them, that's where you start to get into the cost. But because we wanted the best, we created the light catcher case, which has become now prevalent throughout our collection. And Adrian Bushman, our senior designer, this was, it's one of his great contributions, I think, to to watchmaking and watch design over the past 5 or 10 years or more, it is a wonderful, wonderful case. And if you know about watches, and when you get one of those cases in your hand, you can see that what we are doing is a completely different level to other brands that people compare us with in terms of price. And therefore, I can honestly say, I believe this. I'm bound to say it, but I absolutely believe it, that if somebody can show me an equivalent quality watch anywhere in the world today, anywhere in the world today, to what we're doing, they can have the watch free. And nobody has been able, when you really get down to looking at the level of detail and what we do in our watches, because we refuse to make compromises, they are they are truly great value. But it's not because we go out with a price in mind necessarily. It's because we have a simple mechanism of whatever it takes, it's ×3. Whatever it costs, it's ×3.
I would totally agree with that. The World Timer that I reviewed, not only was I blown away by the case, the crown is properly sized, which I think a lot of these reissues make like a tiny crown. And the way the whole dial itself came together, the GMT hand, it looks almost partially invisible because of that really deep black dial. The date almost appears invisible on the dial because it's got it's a lot of the little details, and the hands like blew me away. The bevel, there's a lot of things that you could have got away with not doing. I think.
I mean, I'm surrounded by some really talented people, and Will Brackfield, who is another one of our designers. I mean, we're very design led. I mean, I've always been involved in. I mean, my background is the fashion industry years ago, and I work with people like Terence Conran, and so design has always been central to what I'm about as an individual. We've managed to, in Will's case, train up. In Adrian's case, bring in some of I think the best talent in watch design there is. I mean, I don't know if you know, I mean, many of the brands that that we all know and love, very often they're not designed in-house. It's like a lot of watches, a lot of watch brands, a lot of micro brands as well. You and I could set off and set up a watch brand tomorrow. Give me a shout if you want to. I can take you to where lots of brands that we all know and say kind of love will go to in Switzerland, and it's a turnkey operation. You'll go with some ideas. Their designers will churn out the designs. Their factories will churn out the watches. They'll even ship them for you now. It's a complete turnkey operation, and I think some people would be very surprised at some of the names that use that. Whereas we've never gone down that route. It's always, even when I think in the earlier days people were having to suffer my design thoughts on our watches. At least it was us. It was us. And we've just, I think, got better and better over the years, and now instead of producing what I think, and I think if fairly, people 10 years ago would criticize some of the things we did as being homages. The fact that most watch brands produce homages of some sort or another doesn't matter, but I would say that's fair cop. And we set off 6-7 years ago to recreate the design aesthetic for Christopher Ward so that it had something that was singularly owned by Christopher Ward. And to do that, you need really great designers and then great technicians to translate the designs into things that work, and then great manufacturers to turn the technicians' ideas and the designers' ideas into real 3D animated products. And it's all about, any business is all about the people. And I'm very thankful for some of the real talent that we've got at our disposal, because it's not by accident that these things happen. It's people that create these things, and they're such genuine, talented people that my job is just to keep pushing them to pushing the envelope a bit further every time, just and making people unafraid to do things. There's an awful lot of conservatism in the watch industry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there are other great brands as well who do what we do, which is try and push the boundaries in our world, within the sort of framework of where we lie. But it's a as you know, it's a wonderful industry to be involved in, because virtually anything is possible if you've got the inventiveness and the curiosity to want to bring it to life. And I'm fortunate enough at the moment. A couple of weeks ago, Roger Smith and I launched the Alliance of British Watch and Clockmakers.
I was going to ask you about that, because a friend to the show, Nicholas from Fears, has just joined as well.
He has indeed. And Nicholas, who I know very well, is I'm very pleased to say he's one of the founding members. Roger, at one level, some people might think that Roger's a traditionalist. Far from it. I mean, he is pushing boundaries all the time. The coaxial movement, he's developed that beyond recognition. I mean, and has now got the evidence that says that, because of course one of the great debates within the watch industry is, the lever escapement versus the coaxial escapement. Anybody who hasn't got the coaxial, of course, says the lever is better. And Omega did a really smart thing in getting hold of it, because there's no doubt, and we don't have it, but then nobody else has. The coaxial is a better escapement. And why is it better? Because it takes away a degree of the greatest problem that all mechanical watches have, which is the need for lubrication. Yeah. So what Roger's now been able to demonstrate is through the developments of his coaxial movement in the watches he's created, because don't forget, George Daniels only ever created 8 coaxial watches in his lifetime. So you didn't have a body of work big enough really to be sure about the benefits of the coaxial versus the lever escapement. And what Roger has been able to demonstrate now is that for his watches, certainly, instead of there being a 5-year period for a service, that has already moved to 15 years. That's an amazing thing. And he is working with Manchester Metropolitan University on what might be the biggest breakthrough that watchmaking has had, since the 18th century, which is a nanotechnology covering of all the moving parts in a watch, which effectively would take away the need for servicing a watch for all time.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? And this is something he is working on at the moment with Manchester Metropolitan University, not far away from your.
It's where I went. Yeah, I feel like.
Well, it's all right.
I feel like maybe I wasted my 3 years then if they've come out with this.
That is amazing. So yeah, he's been working with them for a good while. Development apparently had to slow down because of COVID back in March, but it's back on the agenda now. They're back working. And there are no guarantees. It's a bit like vaccines, but there are no guarantees of this. But if Roger's work with Manchester Met comes to fruition, that is a complete and total game changer.
Yeah,
total and utter game changer. Wow. And this is a guy who's just interested in traditional watchmaking. Do me a favor, it's fantastic, and and so. That's why we think that's one of the reasons, not the nanotechnology, but one of the motivations for launching the Alliance was because we'd like to, apart from making the watchmaking sector and watch brands in British watch brands more known across the world, and there are far more of them than people ever realize. In fact, never we realized until we started collating the information. But it's a really vibrant sector at the moment. When we started back in 2004, there was kind of just us and Bremont and one or two others. There's more than 50 now. It's fantastic. It's one of the fastest growing sectors of UK in the UK, but it's not known as a sector. So the alliance was formed to bring a focus on the sector, to give it a platform across the world to be celebrated and to grow. And one of the aims we have is to bring back as much innovation and therefore in time, hopefully, supplying of parts and components to UK watchmaking. We're not trying to become Switzerland Mark II. The UK, just as it's done in the automotive industry, look at what it does with Formula One. We're never going to have the biggest automotive industry in the world in the UK ever again. But my goodness, we are the leaders in the technology. And that's Roger and mine's vision, if you like, for British watchmaking, because there's something about the Brits, we are a curious, inventive breed. And, if we put our minds to things, we're also quite entrepreneurial. If we put our minds to things, we can create things like George Daniels did. If that isn't the greatest invention in 250 years of watchmaking, I don't know what is. In fact, I think George Daniels is the greatest Englishman over the last century that virtually nobody's ever heard about.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, especially because Manchester, for our US listeners, very well known for textiles, and it makes sense that fabrics and things like that and additional coatings is right in Manchester's sweet spot, going back to the Industrial Revolution. So
it's really, and of course it's always been a big centre for watchmaking as well. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think Roger did his studied horology in Manchester, and that's where he first came across George Daniels. George was booked to give a lecture to the students, and listening to George, Roger was so sort of entranced. He determined that's who he wanted to work with, and that's what he wanted to do, and the rest is history.
Wow, maybe I should have spent less time in the student union when I was at MMU.
There's still time, you could go back.
Yeah, I talked with a lot of US micro brands, and the big thing for them is that they would love to make more of the watches in the US, but it's just having those suppliers that have been outsourced. Apparently hairsprings are incredibly hard to source from anyone except for the main providers. Well, before we finish up here, I'd love to talk to you about the new chronograph, the C65 chronograph that you've just released, which was incredible, coming straight off the back of the super compressor, straight away to have another almost revolutionary watch in the industry as well. It was quite cool to see, and the ad campaign is just fantastic. I'm a big fan of Liechtenstein artwork and stuff, and you've incorporated a lot of those themes into the advertising. So
yeah. And the I don't know if you saw the cover of our magazine Loop, which was created for us by Craig and Carl.
Yeah, I've got it here.
Brilliant. And they themselves, they've worked with some amazing people, Nike, Apple, Google, and it turned out fortuitously again for us that one of them's a fan of Christopher Ward. So we got a real mate's deal on the on the artwork, which I'm hoping to have a big piece of it hanging on the wall in my home in the not too distant future. It might actually replace the Bob Dylan.
Oh yes, in the background.
But anyway, yes, the C65 chronograph. I had back at a Christopher Get Together last year, pre-pandemic. I had announced to the assembled CW fans that 2020 was designated as the year of the chronograph. It didn't quite. It turned out, as I think I say in Loop magazine, to be part year of the chronograph in that because Solita closed just before they were due to deliver the 510 BHA movements to us back in February, early March. Chronographs had to be delayed to this autumn, which turned out to be pretty fortuitous again in some ways, in that it did mean we pulled forward the blue sapphire, which so you win some, you lose some. But the C65 chronograph is I think an interesting watch in lots of ways, because I think COVID is a sort of it's an interesting sort of contrast to it as well. All of us, this has been the weirdest year that any of us have ever lived, probably.
Yep.
Hopefully the weirdest year we'll ever live again. It's had its darker moments for lots of people. The C65, which is based on that period of the late 60s into the early 70s in terms of the flavor of it, which is very much into psychedelia, Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett. The world was changing. London was the center of the world at that time. Pop art was beginning to emerge all over the place. And so, as with everything, eventually watches of that era took on some of the mores of culture that were happening around that time, became much more colorful, more adventurous. And we want to, and you've seen a bit of a return to that. I think there are some great examples out there from other brands at the moment of taking this sort of nuance on. We wanted to take it on in our own particular way, and therefore created the C65 chronograph by Compacts, because that was the sort of the chronograph look of that time, particularly lateral, horizontal by Compacts. And that sort of regatta-esque countdown, the C65 retro case was perfect for this as well. A relatively new Sellita chronograph movement into it. The first of our, we introduced the screw down crown onto the C65 case with it. So lots of things going on, and just some of the attention to detail in it. I know it's a bit nerdish, isn't it? But if asked, my favorite piece of detail in the entire watch is the date wheel, where we print red onto white. And I just love that just forget the rest of the watch. That for me is just beautiful. And it's those little details that, when you add them all together, often what excite people. And interesting enough, I'm just reading it's a plug for another for a British author. I'm just actually reading a book called Utopia Avenue,
okay,
which is set in 1969 and is all about that sort of period. I'm about 50 pages in so far, but it's certainly got me interested, because I love that period of culture. It's where much of what our culture of today, as we know, really sort of stems from that period. So
I'm a huge I'll jump on that thing with you. I love the date on a watch, and I love the way that you've done this. Not only is it red, but it's also sort of vertical as well.
Yes, absolutely. Down there at 6, yeah.
But I forgot to ask you this earlier, but I think of Christopher Ward as one of the first, with the exception of Oris, that really started using Sellita. And I think a lot of people don't realise that one time Sellita produced, I think it was 2009, more movements than ETA that shipped to third parties. Now, there was some Swiss Competition Commission things going on that restricted ETA, but
indeed,
it's really for quite a relatively new company, I guess Sellita is. So when did you make the switch to Sellita? You said earlier on you'd used ETA earlier on.
Yeah, I mean, we still have a really good relationship with ETA, and still occasionally use some of their movements. But the bulk of our movements, certainly our three-hand automatic movements, the SW200, they all come from Sellita now, and have done for some time. We like many others, when the whole ETA thing was going on back in 08, 09, etc. I think Sellita really brilliantly took the opportunity to develop their business. But the thing that really swung it for us is we were running in parallel for a long time 2824s against the SW200, and what that gave us the opportunity of doing was testing the quality of these.
Yeah.
And perhaps because the tooling at Sellita is newer, there can be, our technical director at the time, a guy called Johannes Janker, who was also the designer of SH21, who now is one of the technical directors at Sellita. Interesting. He wanted to run a proper quality control test between the two, because we pretty much 50-50. And what we discovered was that the quality of Sellita's movements was superior. So when we discovered that, and because quality is at the core of everything we do, we decided to move across entirely to Sellita. So it was a decision born out of the controversial move by the Swatch Group to limit the supply of ETA movements potentially. Yeah. As you know, and as I think everybody knows, it's sort of the whole thing backfired on them in a way because, and was, I think, although they claim that this was the reason they did it at the time, I'm not entirely sure this is true, but what it did do was spawn an incredible amount of inventiveness, and I think that's been really valuable for the industry, and got us creating our own movement, for goodness sake, and even if a very well-known chief executive of a very, very well-known brand at the time said when he saw it, we showed it to him at Basel World, what gives you the license to do that, he said. Which is one of my favorite quotes since being in the industry, because it sort of tells you an awful lot about sometimes the snootiness and the closed-mindedness of parts of the industry, and doesn't do the credit to the wonderful, wonderful people who are in the industry. I think it's like many industries, it's got two sides. But yeah, so born of the initial Swatch Group resistance to supplying movements to the rest of into third parties, but then because of its superior quality, became the workhorse movement for us in a sense. And I must say, Mr. Garcia, who owns and runs Sellita, is an exceptional watch man and has built an amazing bit. If you ever get the chance to go and see their plant, which is grown out of all report, it's huge now compared to what it was 10, even 5 years ago. It's a wonderful experience because it is an amazing facility.
Mike, thanks so much for joining us on Casual Watch Talk this week. Big thanks to you.
It's a real pleasure, Sam, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. If you've got any questions, head on over to the Facebook group for Casual Watch Talk. As always, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks, guys. Bye.